We have today our panel presentation on accessible mobility, and we are lucky to have Joanna Pinkerton, President and CEO with COTA, here with us today, and Kevin Wheeler, who's the Assistant Director of Growth Policy for the City of Columbus. And so Kevin and Joanna have both prepared presentations. Joanna will go first, and then Kevin, and then we will move into our panel discussions. I can't, before starting, I know everyone is probably getting the same amount of messages, I don't know about tweets, and text messages about what is happening in Washington, D.C. And there are protests down at our State House as well. And so hopefully, if I get, any updates to share, I will try to share those with everyone. Thank you, Denise, for asking about Congresswoman Beatty. She is in a safe location. I've also received word that both of our senators are in safe locations. So we shouldn't, be worried. Well, we should be worried, but we don't have to worry about them physically, at this time. And as far as the State House protests, I don't have much word on that. I do get quite a bit of word. Our building has visibility to the State House because of some cameras that we have. And I haven't heard of any destruction or anything like that. So, I know we're all thinking about it. I know we all want this to be over, and we're all sad for our country, quite frankly, because of what is happening. We are known, the peaceful transfer of power is part of what this country is about, and to see that kind of eroding in front of us, it's not good, and it's also sad when I think about what do we tell our children about this. So hopefully we'll move beyond this. This too shall pass, but couldn't start the meeting without mentioning that because I know it's on everybody's mind. And Joanna happens to be physically near DC, but not in DC, thank goodness. So I will turn it over to Joanna, and we'll let you start your presentation. Thank you for being here with us today.
Christy, I appreciate you as chair of this committee inviting us, and I do think I'm going to give the helm to Kevin first because he has some bigger picture things. But I do want to thank you for inviting both myself and the city to speak today. When I look at this room of people, I think what an incredible brain trust to be tackling this topic of resiliency, recovery and resiliency, of course, having to do with the COVID pandemic, but it's a topic we probably all should talk about, whether there was a pandemic or not, because amazing cities do not happen by chance. They happen because of a lot of the work put forward by the people on this committee. So I think between the two of us, we have some ideas we'd like to share with you about how important mobility is, how it affects people in the economy, how ubiquitous it should be, and how we need to start thinking differently about the future instead of just repeating the past. Kevin, can I turn it over to you?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Joanna. I'm going to go ahead and share the screen. And this is a PowerPoint that I'm going to walk through. I'll try to be brief and leave plenty of time for Joanna's portion of the presentation and any questions that you may have. So like her, I also appreciate being invited, and this is a great committee, so it's great to be able to talk to you today. We start with an image that really just simply shows the change over time on the left of the growth over time of the city territorially by decade, and then on the right, our growth in terms of population by decade. And really what this slide does more than anything is to show that the past, which has been sort of characterized by dramatic territorial growth in Columbus, we've grown from 40 square miles in 1950 to over 220 today, is waning. That pattern of growth is really changing, but our population continues to grow. I'm sure nobody on this call was alive in 1950, or maybe hardly any of us. But if you were, this is where the city was at that point. This is Columbus in the middle of Franklin County, and you can see some of these outlying communities like Dublin, 300 people, by the way, at that point, Westerville, Grove City, and so on, really pretty far removed from the core of the city. And then here we are today, and of course we're all together, whether we always want to be or not. We've become a much more complex region. Some of the trends that we see in growth as we look to the future, a future that looks different from our past, is continued population growth, more infill development and redevelopment. Really, one of the things that we saw from 1950 onward was a loss of population in our core city, pretty dramatic loss, one that was typical of Midwestern and Northeastern cities across the country, but that's now begun to reverse. And so we're beginning to see infill and redevelopment, again, less territorial expansion. Many people on this call know that rising housing costs are an acute problem for our community, and inadequate supply, which of course is related to cost in some ways. A desire for more transportation options in walkable neighborhoods, increased demand for multifamily and smaller homes and smaller lots. Single-family homes on large lots aren't going away. They just represent, as we move to the future, a smaller portion of demand. Not all neighborhoods have prospered, and I know that's a lot of what you all have been talking about as you think about transitions. So that's something that we're acutely aware of. We're asking questions in the community as a city as we look to the future and try to better understand it and shape it. Where are people going to live and work? How are they going to get around? What will our neighborhoods look like? How do we build opportunity for our residents, build platforms for equity? All these questions are critical to our contemplation of the future. And the good news here is that work is actually already underway, and I'm just going to go over a few key examples: transit, zoning, housing, and sustainability. So first, link us. And I won't go into too much detail here because I know we have the benefit of having the executive director of COTA with us who can talk more about this. But Columbus, COTA, Middle Ohio Regional Planning Commission, Franklin County, and others have come together to work on an initiative to advance mobility corridors. And what that really means is improved transit, enhanced transit on key corridors in the region in conjunction with bike and pedestrian improvements and other transportation improvements in a way that will attract and support additional housing, job creation, and just redevelopment and reinvestment in some of our neighborhoods. And this is an outgrowth in part of work that COTA did with their Next Gen initiative and that MORPC did in partnership with the city and others around Insight 2050. And so this work has begun, and we've got a website, and so much is happening with it, it's hard to keep up. And we can talk more about that if you'd like. The zoning code update. Some of you are aware that the city is updating its zoning code. This hasn't happened since the 1950s. We've changed the zoning code many, many times in many ways since then, but we haven't had the opportunity to just stop and take a good look at the whole code in a comprehensive sense. And so we're doing that. And you probably understand that zoning is different than policy. It's regulatory. It addresses how you can use your property, how buildings are placed, the size of buildings, et cetera. And it's a powerful tool for encouraging and facilitating investment. Sadly, zoning, like restrictive covenants, redlining, and other things that are part of a darker past in terms of public policy implications, has also been used to exclude people. And that, of course, limits opportunity, and that's one of the things we're going to be looking at as we work to update the code. We want to look at how we accommodate future growth, how we move away from reliance on variances and overlays. If you're a student of city council kinds of activities, then you might be interested to know that 96% of all city council zoning actions result in a site-specific condition. That's negotiation for a specific site. And so we know that when everything we do, or most everything we do, has to be done by exception, it's time to look at the base code to see if there are ways that we can update that to make it more helpful and more aligned with our priorities around growth in the future. We need a code that gives us better infill design guidelines. We need a code that helps to support transit options. Certainly, we need a code that considers ways to incentivize or encourage affordable housing. And then, obviously, you know, I report to the development director, and we've got to figure out ways to make sure that folks have jobs and that we have places for those jobs. And that's part of what we think about when we think about zoning. It's a two-phase process. Phase one is the assessment of the code, the current code, policy, and process. And we're in that stage right now. And the culmination of that will be an update strategy to help us address phase two. And we'll actually start looking at and updating the code itself. And one of the things that we're doing in this phase one is specifically trying to take a look at how we have traditionally engaged the public and stakeholders and mapping out a strategy for phase two that will do, frankly, a better job of that. And when I say a better job, I mean one that reaches a broader portion of our community, particularly segments of our community that have traditionally been underrepresented, certainly in the zoning process and development process, whether that's minority community, lower income folks, for whom English is not their first language. We want to be deliberate about broadening that engagement. And so this phase that we're in now will continue through this coming summer. And then we're hoping to pivot in the fall to phase two. And so, you know, I'm looking forward to being able to talk about that phase once we've begun it, because that's when the real work starts. Housing, again, I think many of you on this call or in this meeting are very aware of the work that's been done in our region around affordable housing. And certainly the city was a big part and partner to MORPC as they led the regional housing strategy. The mayor has made affordability a key priority in his administration. You're aware that we have the affordable housing bond allocation. You're aware that banks have made commitments to support affordable housing financing. And we as a city recently went through a revamping of a residential tax incentive strategy. And that's something that we'll be doing on an ongoing basis as we look at these and other tools to link or to fit in with the regional housing strategy recommendations. Sustainable Columbus, one of the things that we're also working on, and this is work that's coming out of our Public Utilities Department, is better understanding how environment and climate change need to be a part of how we think about our future, how it needs to inform the decisions that we make around programs and policies. And so this work has been underway now for some time as we continue to try to make advancements in this area. So a climate action plan is under development. We've been working on urban forestry master plan, parkland dedication ordinance, energy aggregation. Of course, that was on the ballot recently. A whole host of efforts in this arena. All these things, sustainability, transit, zoning, affordable housing, are all interrelated. These are all aligned efforts that collectively are a big part of shaping how our region will be growing. And so as we move into 2021 and beyond, you'll be hearing a lot more about these efforts, how they link together, and we'll be coming to you asking for your perspective and your input as a part of that work. And I believe that's my last slide. So I'm going to stop and turn it over to Joanna Pinkerton, and I thank you, and we'll be available for questions if you have any later. Thank you.
Great. Christy, would you like to entertain any questions now, or would you like us to keep rolling?
We would like you to keep rolling, and then we have a panel Q&A panel after
Great.
Your presentation.
So I will take the helm from Kevin, and I'll drill down a bit more on mobility. So I'm going to immediately take us to the next slide. As I speak to you today, I would like you to think about three things which are underway. And bear with me a moment while I, can you see my slides? No. Okay, working on that.
We are working on that. Grace's permissions disappeared, so we're putting them back on.
Okay.
So just 1 second here.
Okay, great.
Go, now we can see it.
Okay, so we'll jump right into the next slide. Many of you, you're so intertwined in the initiatives of the community, have likely heard of these three things. And as I chat with you today, I'd like you to think about these in context of what they could potentially do to radicalize mobility and make mobility not so much a barrier in our community, but make it an enabling activity that leads us to the economic prosperity that we're pursuing. The first is, let's take microtransit. We're dabbling in it. We're doing great things, but let's get it everywhere. Another one, which is mobility as a benefit. We already have great demonstrated success of employers helping pay for discounted transit access, unlimited access for their employees. And we can show that it works not only with employee retention and turnover rates, but with congestion and many other things that affect a growing city. And then Link Us, which Kevin alluded to, and I'll share a bit more about Link Us quickly. I'd like you to see an overview of our strategic plan on the next slide. The most important thing about this, many of you were interviewed and were involved. We also interviewed our employees. And when COTA decided to do our first strategic plan ever, clearly there were a lot of business principles which needed to be identified. But look at that center gear there, equity, diversity, and inclusion. That's not just a pillar, it is the center of everything we do. Kevin alluded to a lot of functional systems in government, many of them dating back to a very dark period in our country's history with redlining and policies that disenfranchised and marginalized populations. So think about the fact that our entire infrastructure was built off of those policies. So what we're trying to work with today was inherently built with a very singular focus. And I look at this room and I think, how amazing is it to have such an inclusive group of leaders who can look at things through a much broader view to make sure that we are being inclusive so that we can achieve prosperity for all. So I just wanted to validate and recommit to you that that is our goal at COTA as well. I do not intend to walk you through every single slide. Next, please, Grace. It was mostly intended to be a pre-read in case you needed a refresh. Here, the black border is the 562 square mile area that COTA encompasses. We're very unique in the nation that we provide transit for a highly urbanized area and also some less dense areas. And next, you will see some of our basic numbers, 2019 stats, more than 19 million trips. The 1.2 million C-Pass rides, those are rides that were paid for by employers. So I can tell you that it works. Roughly 60,000 trips a day pre-COVID. And right now, I think this is surprising to many, even though we are artificially suppressing service, we're still doing almost 26 to 30,000 trips a day. You see the mainstream, that is our ADA service. We are running at almost 60% of our normal capacity. And take a look at the number, 305,000 mainstream trips last year. The year before that was 250. So as our population changes and gets much older and much younger, we expect that 305,000 number, the need to almost quadruple in the next 10 years of ADA and aging in place seniors. More than 3,000 transit stops, and as I mentioned, we cover 562 square miles. Next, you'll see our fleet. Those of you who knew COTA before me, the only type of vehicles were the ones on the left. We have more than 300 of them now. We're diversifying our portfolio. Mainstream ADA equipped. COTA Plus is our on-demand microtransit, and we now have a fleet of more than 105 passenger vehicles. Those are on-demand service specifically for seniors and ADA customers. So pandemic, 2 slides ahead. This was just intended to give you an overview. If you'd like to read it after the fact, of some of the difficult decisions we've had to make during the pandemic when there was not a lot of information and no guidance at the time of what to do. We did do unique things like suspend fares, primarily at first until we had guidance on personal protective equipment. And then for the remainder of the year, we made that decision to support an economy in distress. We do return to fares next week. On the next slide, I want to thank Brian Ross and Experience Columbus in particular. Our community is pursuing Global Biorisk Advisory Council certification. We will be the first transit agency in the nation GBAC certified. I love those #1 labels. And we join the airport and many other entities in making sure that people who come to Columbus know that we are committed to safety. Our entire fleet has been protected by antimicrobial shield, the same type of things used in the hospital and trucking and food industries. And we are committed to the Live Forward pledge. So some customer needs. On the next slide, you're going to see in the center, COTA customers prior to COVID. On the right, during COVID, the early months. What you'll see there is probably not surprising, a major shift, a drop in the demographics of people who had resources. So people who had the ability to stay home, who had the choice to work from home. That was a big shift for us in the type of person riding COTA. And on the next slide, what I'd like you to see there is it pretty much tracks with the community. So, roughly 10% of people unemployed, people losing hours, and less people ability to work from home. I think it may be surprising to many that we are higher than the average of people using COTA who are employed. It was up there in the 70% range. But then as the economy changed during the summer, we found new customers coming to us who were in need. We'll talk about that in a moment. Next slide. So something we plan to launch this year. When you look at equity, the map there on the left, that's where you can purchase access to COTA. By the end of this year, we will have increased retail locations by 1,000%. 52% of our current customers use cash. That is not really the way of the future, and it certainly is not an easy thing to handle during a pandemic. We will not only be going app-based, but we will be going smart card-based, and these 1,000 retail locations and a network of more than 100 nonprofits will be able to convert cash to smart card to ensure that we are taking the most equitable approach of getting those who may not have resources into a digital age. On the next slide, just a reiteration of what Kevin alluded to. This is really what keeps us up at night. It's not so much how to survive the pandemic and how to run the company. It's what do you do with the million people who are moving here? On the next slide, some trends that you need to know about if you're not a mobility geek like me. Less than 25% of 16-year-olds have a driver's license. Millennials are not purchasing individual cars. The trend is moving to mobility as a service. Right there in the center, something that should be concerning to all of us when we think about economic resiliency. Central Ohio has one of the highest per capita household transportation costs in the nation. So that 28 to 30%, there are some areas where it gets as high as 33%. That is money that people are putting down the gas tank as opposed to investing or purchasing a home, food. They're making really difficult choices. Almost a third of the household income is going to transportation. In dense cities, this is not Columbus's near-term future, but that cost is only about 10%. But in a realistic concept, I think something Columbus can achieve, blended households where you use a single occupant vehicle or car services and transit combined, you can depress that cost down to almost 20%. So basically putting 10% of people's paycheck back in their pocket. In the bottom is are some big stats that we tend not to think about, but we're already losing $1 billion a year due to congestion and loss of productivity. Another $500 million a year in what's called state of good repair. That's what we do to repair cars and vehicles who are traveling on damaged roads. And then another $2 billion in economic loss due to fatalities, crashes, and serious injuries. So when you think about it, that's money that's already leaking out the window because we're not investing it in other ways. So a positive trend on the next slide, mobility as a service. I'm sure all of you have noticed this era. We all have apps on our phones. But it's really important that we talk about equity when it comes to new technology in the transportation industry, whether it's autonomous vehicles, whether it's transportation network companies being able to hail a ride to work or a doctor. Some issues facing Central Ohio. 1 in 5 African American commuters don't have a car. I'll show you in a couple slides. We have one neighborhood in particular where car ownership is only 12%. Also, transit is not always necessary. Fixed route is not always necessary, especially in areas where we're not as dense in the Columbus area. A lot of jobs and residents continue to be moved into areas or territories that aren't necessarily transit friendly, whether they were not built to sustain the infrastructure or there's just not the density. But there's a huge market opportunity here. When I first came to COTA, that market was estimated to be 10 to 15 billion in shared services. It's projected that in less than 5 years, it's going to be $1/3 $1 trillion industry. So whether we choose to engage this or not, it's going to happen to us. So on the next slide, just wanted to show you some examples. I was looking through the slides that former presenters had shared with you at some of your other meetings. And there was one that stuck in my mind about attracting today's best talent for young professionals. And I think it said something like, we're the #1 in the Midwest for millennial migration in, and we were like number 11 or 12 in the nation, in the US, for millennial migration to Columbus. So of course I was like, well, who were number 1 through 10? Every one of those other cities are using these trends of having more mass transit, more high capacity transit, and then filling it in with micromobility and micro transit services. So, and then they're also modifying their infrastructure. So just a couple examples here. Phoenix has a transit system similar to ours, just like Chicago, where you can now hail any microtransit service for a flat fee and take it to transit. And that way you don't have to own a car. You see some things here on the right in San Antonio, where more than 1,000 transit stops have been retrofitted to allow microtransit to arrive and deliver the person to mass transit. So on the next slide, I'd like you to picture reimagining COTA's system. The blue there is the existing COTA network. It was redesigned 3 years ago. It is showing incredible results, one of the highest growth in transit ridership in the nation. And then the yellow is a 3-mile accessibility buffer. So I don't expect anyone's going to walk 3 miles to use transit. We do know that people will go about a 1/4 mile, a 1/2 mile. But what if in that 3 mile or even in the 5 mile buffer, if there were smaller systems that allowed you to access transit? So on the next slide, that first thing I asked you to think about when I opened the discussion was microtransit rather. So COTA Plus, if you're not familiar, has been launched by COTA in the entire city of Grove City, in the entire city of Westerville, and then in November, mid-pandemic, we launched in South Columbus. In South Columbus, we cover 16 neighborhoods. And when I mentioned earlier that we really have to think about being inclusive, there's a lot of things you look at with shared mobility and transit. You look at density, gaps in transit service. We're trying to make sure you can get to mass transit. Our infrastructure, there's a lot of missing pieces, maybe poor street lighting, sidewalks. When we evaluated the South Side, for example, it had an employment rate of 41%, car ownership of only 12%. 1 in 5 indicate that they may not be able to pay their rent or mortgage next month. And they have very unpredictable hourly schedules. So it was kind of a no-brainer to us that we have to try this in that neighborhood, because you have people who are trying to connect to job centers, but essentially are in a transit and an automobile desert because of economic situations. The next slide, bus on demand. The only thing that you need to know as a non-technician is we now have the analytics to scale up. So picture COTA Plus, it's a van size, can hold up to 6. If we begin to sense that there's a greater need, the same ability to hail the COTA Plus by app or by phone, we can start sending a full-scale mass transit vehicle. So it's bus on demand. We're the first in the United States to do this. We're currently doing this in Northeast Columbus, from the airport over to some employment areas around Gahanna, New Albany, where we had launched COTA Plus as an emergency service during the pandemic. We found so many hourly wage workers trying to get to work. We began using the same on-demand hailing software where you can actually hail a large-scale bus during the morning surges. Next, I'd like to just reiterate the concept of what Kevin introduced. I think most of you have at least heard of Link Us. But it's really time for us to come together as a community, civic leaders, nonprofit leaders, corporate community, the leadership, and say it's time to rebuild. We have the potential, I believe, to pull down hundreds of millions of dollars from the federal government through transit grants that Columbus has never pursued before, to build out major corridors. And the corridors are not just about mobility. They are about transforming our communities to more walkable, bikeable, livable areas where housing is supported with commercial development. And a lot of what Kevin talked about, like getting away from the 1950s zoning code. It would be our responsibility, I believe, to put in higher capacity transit systems along these corridors, and then to also put micromobility and microtransit so that people within those corridors can easily access the high capacity transit. The Northwest Corridor was the first to launch. We have a great coalition of private partners participating on that. When you look at the tens of millions of square feet of development that's already planned along the Northwest Corridor, it makes a lot of sense. East Corridor and West Broad Corridor are also underway. When you think about the size of Main Street and Broad Street and how they just continue to grow over the years without really having a plan other than tearing down some really incredible community spaces, it's time for us to rebuild and fill in along those corridors. I do believe within the next fiscal year, within the incoming presidential administration, there will be grant opportunities for us if we can pull together the local private funding or public funding to leverage federal dollars to build out multiple corridors at the same time in our community. And lastly, I just want to circle back to those 3 ideas. I think it's time for us to think about equitable mobility access in neighborhoods. I'd like to see, as we're trying to help employers come back online and make decisions about occupancy rates, to talk to them about mobility. We always make sure there's water and sewer and electricity and all of these things that they need. Broadband's a big topic right now. But making sure your employees can move and live, whether it's they need a trip to the grocery store or they need a trip to the office, I think that's part of the benefits package that we could make unique to Columbus and Central Ohio. And then I think we should really think about throwing our weight behind transforming our communities through the Link Us initiative. We do have to go to DC together on this one. It can't be COTA alone. It can't be the city alone. It has to be everyone saying that this is going to be a priority in our community to build over the next 5 to 7 years. So with that, I will turn it back over to you, Christy.
Thank you, Joanna. Thank you, and thank you, Kevin, for both presentations. We will now move into the panel, the Q&A portion of our meeting. And at this time, typically we also, would, so we take questions from our committee members, but I also invite Emil. I can't see him on my screen, but I see, there he is. I invite Emil to join in as well. Emil is, I'm probably going to get your title wrong. I say Chief Operating Officer, but that may be wrong. And he's with COTA and an executive in Joanna's team. And so we invite him to participate in this conversation as well. So I'll turn the question. My mind is not working, can't you tell? It's January 6th. It takes me a while to come back from the holidays. I invite our committee members to ask questions. So who wants to be first? Let's go first.
Christy, this is Tasha.
Yes. Hi, Tasha.
Hi. Mine's more of just a comment of graciousness to COTA. So, Joanna, thank you for your presentation. And Emil, I am representing City Year, which you know. COTA has been a longstanding partner with City Year. Emil was a former board member. We now have another board member from COTA. And COTA has supported our work for the last 26 years by providing bus passes to all of our AmeriCorps members. This year, 62 Corps members for a total of about $50,000 every year for nearly 25 years. And so I wanted to just publicly start off by just saying thank you. COTA has been a jewel in our community for so long, and I'm really excited to see where they are going. Are there more opportunities, or can you talk about, Joanna, some of the opportunities or partnerships you're creating, not just with nonprofit partners like City Year, but with other companies? And as we think about economic recovery, can you share a little bit about what COTA is doing to help our community recover?
Absolutely. Tasha, I really appreciate your thank you. And I do want to answer your question. I do want to defer to Christy. I know President-elect Biden is speaking at the moment, and I just wanted to check with you in case you felt the need to allow people to follow that. I know my team is pinging me right now to make sure I'm just up to speed. And quite frankly, since it's like 7 miles away from me, it's awful to feel like this. So I just wanted to defer to you, but I definitely want to answer your question, Tasha. It's a good one.
Yeah, I am getting some texts myself, and as you might imagine, really concerned about my mother-in-law because they have breached her building.
Christy, this is Sandy. I'm going to make a suggestion that maybe not everybody will appreciate, but we actually have a bit of a national crisis going on right now, and Biden is speaking live. I think this is extremely distracting for us, and I'm not sure we can have a productive conversation right now with all of us being concerned.
I agree. Sandy's my board chair. You all. I think, Hannah, we need to, if we can recess, and Joanna and Kevin, if we can bring you back, because I know we do have some questions and things, but we are in a national crisis, and I think we need to pay attention to what's happening in Washington and listen to the president-elect.
Absolutely. Christy, we have our last meeting in January that does not have any scheduled speakers. So I will work with the team to see if Joanna and Kevin can join us to answer any questions at that time.
Okay. And we have a meeting, Hannah, on Friday to discuss a couple of things, because there are a couple other items we probably are going to want to bring up, childcare, and got some higher ed conversations. So we will get back to everyone early next week with a revised schedule. Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Hang in there.
Peace.